All right, Councillor Cisco, we're good to go whenever you are.
Excellent. I'd like to welcome everybody. Good afternoon. Welcome to the Budget Standing Committee meeting for Monday, September the 21st, 2020. We'll call the meeting to order and we'll begin with the land acknowledgement. We begin this gathering by acknowledging the land on which we gather is the traditional territory of the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe peoples, many of whom continue to live and work here today. This territory is covered by the Upper Canada Treaties and is within the land protected by the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Agreement. Today, this gathering place is home to many First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples. Acknowledging this reminds us that our great standard of living is directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous people. We will now look to the Deputy Clerk for the adoption of the agenda.
The only amendment to today's agenda is that discussion item 10.1, becoming a living wage employer follow-up. This report has been removed from the agenda and will be coming forward at a future meeting.
Okay, are there any other amendments to today's agenda? Seeing nobody raising their hands, can I have a motion to adopt the agenda as amended? Councillor Porter? All right, and for a seconder, I have Councillor Phillips. I'm assuming that was a yes because he wasn't on my screen there. All in favor? Anyone opposed? Just looking, none. Excellent. Moving on to item 4, declarations of interest. Are there any declarations of pecuniary interest today? Just scrolling through my screens, I'm not seeing any hands. As a reminder, if councillors do have declarations of pecuniary interest, they need to submit those written statements of declarations to the Deputy Clerk. There are no adoption of the minutes, so we'll just jump right into the Chair's report. Very briefly for today, I will ask, because I'm doing this on an iPad and we're still in the Zoom universe, if councillors or staff would like to speak, I'm going to ask you to use the raise hand tool because that's the easiest way for me to keep track of who needs to speak and who is looking to have a conversation. I only have 9 boxes on my screen, so I have to scroll through everybody to see whether they are raising their hand or not. So if we could use the raise hand tool, that would be extremely helpful to me. I will also just welcome, I believe Councillor Sorrento is the only councillor not on the Budget Committee who is here today. So I just want to thank Councillor Sorrento. As always, he does make an effort to come out to these budget meetings. And that is always appreciated that councillors are taking the time to be well informed before it ever comes to council. With that said, there will be a motion coming forward this afternoon with respect to moving the budget process for the operating and capital budgets this year to a general committee situation where general committee, all of council will be debating the budget as we go. That motion will be coming up, being moved by Councillor Littleton, and I look forward to the debate on that. But I'm hopeful that the budget committee will see fit to pass that forward so that we can have a fulsome debate and hopefully move this year's budget to council as a whole. I think that given the extraordinary circumstances, this is an appropriate time where that might be necessary. But with that, I will move on to motions, and I will look to Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I am moving. Do you want me to read out the entire motion?
I don't think we necessarily need to read it all out. No, I think everybody saw the motion initially. If you just want to speak to it, that's fine.
I just want to say that, so I'll move it, get it on the floor. I agree with it. I think that given the situation we find ourselves in with COVID, it's best to be as transparent as we can about the budget and have as much input right from the beginning from the rest of our councillors. And so that's why I'm in favor of this and why I'm happy to move the motion today. Thank you.
Excellent. And do we have a seconder for the motion? Councillor Porter, thank you. So moved by Councillor Littleton and seconded by Councillor Porter. And for those who are watching at home who haven't been able to read through this, what this would do is suspend the Budget Standing Committee for the debates over the operating and capital budget for 2021 and move those debates to General Committee, which is a committee of all of council on the dates that are listed there. and that it goes into the rules around the agendas being published 5 days prior to the meeting and asks for a suspension of the rules. And if this is passed today, it will be moved up to council at the next council meeting to be debated and hopefully passed at that time. But I will now look, are there anybody who'd like to debate? Councillor Porter.
Sorry, can you repeat that last part?
If anybody that had comment, I saw your hand raised, so I was going to.
Oh, no, my hand was raised just to second the motion. I'm fully in support of this. I think this is an unprecedented budget year, and I would like to be working with all of council on this solutions to the budget constraints that we're under right now. We've got a lot of big decisions, and I don't think it's good having the input from our colleagues at the last minute. I think we need to start having these conversations now. That's all I'll say.
Okay. I'm not seeing any other debate. I will just say I agree with the comments of Councillor Porter and Councillor Littleton. And as I said, I hope our colleagues at council see the utility of this. As has been mentioned, this is an extraordinary year, and I think this step is a good one towards making sure that the 2021 budget is one that we can stick to and get through the entire calendar year without having to make amendments to. If we do it as the whole group, then hopefully there's nothing in there that anybody is concerned with once it's passed. So with that, I'll look to the clerk to call the roll.
Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Mayor Senzik,
Yes.
and Chair Cisco,
Yes.
and that's carried.
Excellent. Moving on to item number 8, call for reports to be brought forward from consent and a motion to move the reports on consent. We have a motion that the Budget Standing Committee approve the consent agenda, save and accept those items brought forward for discussion. And I will look to Councillor Dodge. Councillor Dodge, are you making this motion?
Yes, Mr. Chair.
All right. Then all those in favor of moving the consent agenda? Opposed? Seeing none, that is carried. So moving on to discussion items. Item 10.1 has been removed from the agenda, so we'll move to item 10.2, Legal and Clerk Services, Office of the City Clerk. And I will ask the Deputy Clerk, Kristen Sullivan, to give a brief overview of the report.
Thank you, Chair Cisco. So what you have in front of you is a short report based on work over the past year where staff from across the corporation work closely with a consultant to develop a records and information management strategy. Going into the project, staff recognized and requested funds for this project because we recognized that our current records management at the city was under-resourced and we were quite a bit behind from where we wanted to be. There was a lot of inefficiencies and essentially a lot of our records management is rather ineffective. This doesn't just impact the records that are held in the clerk's office, but really every department. It impacts their day-to-day work and staff across the whole city. Through the consultant, we became aware that our situation is more dire than we actually thought it was, and that by not taking action, if we don't take action, we'll be creating a growing problem that's more complicated and complex to solve. Through an investigation of our current state, the consultant developed a 5-year prioritized roadmap for how the city can get control of our records and data. The most critical factor in moving this strategy forward is the creation of a records and information analyst position. This position would be responsible for working with staff across the city to implement the RIM strategy, as well as be responsible for maintaining the records management program long-term. So that includes everything from policy to governance to training of staff, new and existing staff as they learn our new records management systems. So the consultant recommended and staff agreed that this position needed to be implemented as soon as possible. So what's in front of you right now is a recommendation to include the position in the draft budget for consideration. It wouldn't approve the budget, but it would move it forward in that process. We understand that the timing is a bit unfortunate with COVID and the financial pressures the city's facing at that time. However, with the consultants stressing how important this role is and the state of our record system, we recognize that the status quo is no longer an option. And every year that we would delay this request, our situation will worsen and become more difficult to solve. So we felt even with the current financial situation, it's best to bring that forward for consideration at this time.
All right, thank you, Ms. Sullivan. If I can ask a question, and maybe it's to you and maybe it's to someone else on staff, but with respect to the motion that we just passed, transitioning to general committee for future budget committee meetings. This report, will it be going to the rest of council as a part of this evening's budget minutes? And if so, when will that be going to council?
Yes, it will be moving forward with the budget minutes. Our intent, I think there's a meeting October 5th is the Monday meeting. That is when we would generally have it lined up to go forward. So all of council would see the report. And if, again, it would not approve the position, it would just include it in the draft.
Okay, so that was going to be my second follow-up question. If councilors, if there's someone not on the budget committee, but on council that has a concern about it, would they be able to pull it from the minutes and refer it to that general committee meeting when the first general committee budget meeting? Would they be able to do that so they can have a fulsome discussion if there's concern about the report?
From a procedural perspective, absolutely. That's not a that's part of the regular procedures. At this time, my understanding is that the next budget committee, the intent is to have the draft budget ready to be shared. So the hope is that we can ensure that that draft is as close as possible to the budget that would be discussed at council in December. So that's why we thought bringing it forward now would be the best idea.
No, and I agree, but I just wanted to make sure that if members of council want to have a fulsome discussion about it, that there is the opportunity to bring it forward to one of those general committee budget meetings. Okay, thank you. Looking to, well, actually, sorry, first I need a motion to put this on the floor. Councillor Porter. And do I have a seconder? I thought I saw a second hand go up there somewhere.
Oh, Councillor Phillips.
Councillor Phillips, thank you, Councillor Phillips. And then, okay, debate on the motion. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Chair. First, let me state that I definitely support this initiative. It sounds like we've been operating in the dark ages from what the report has indicated. Question to Kristen. Will this report, as it was written, will that be coming to council, or is it just going to be the minutes of the fact that we've approved this position?
So when we move the minutes forward to the budget standing committee, there is a link to so essentially it says, here's the report title, here's a link to the report so that they can read it, and here's the motion which was approved.
Because to me, this should be almost a report as part of the agenda for the council. Because if somebody doesn't go through for whatever reason and check our minutes, then they're going to miss it totally. Where if it's on the agenda, they're going to see it. Either that, or we have someone defer it until we get to the committee of the whole and discuss it at that point. But I think it has to be highlighted so that all of council sees it and there's no chance of anybody missing it. Just a thought.
I think
support the position.
I think that's a fair comment, Councillor Phillips. And I'm wondering, and I'll put this to the deputy clerk, is there a way for us to ensure that this is discussed at the first general committee budget meeting? Like, is there anything procedurally we can do to ensure that it does go on the agenda? I'd like to be able to pass the report, but I also think that council needs to be aware of it. So can we, at the very least for information purposes, so that it does get discussed?
There's a few things we can do. One, you could, if you do want to make the decision, the recommendation today, you could direct staff to ensure that it is a separate for information report on the council agenda. Alternatively, we could attach it as an appendix to one of the items that would be coming forward with the draft budget.
Okay, I would think that having it come forward as a full report might be a better way to ensure it gets the attention it deserves. I'm looking to Councillor Porter. Would you accept that as an amendment to the motion?
Yes, I will accept that.
And would you like, sorry, just to clarify, would you like that to come forward at when we bring the minutes to council, or when this is discussed for general committee?
I think when it comes forward to council, I think that's the appropriate time. If councilors are going to be voting on the minutes, then this is technically a part of that. So I think that would be the best time, and it gives councilors the opportunity, if people do have questions, then it can be referred to the budget committee, the general committee budget meeting for discussion at that time.
If I could, Chair, I mean, if council sees it and after discussion, they say, great idea, go for it, hire the person, well, then we can do it right after that council meeting. It doesn't even have to be referred to the committee of the whole. Or might want it referred to committee of the whole when the time comes, so be it, we'll do that. But this way, we have a chance of getting it done with council at the meeting and moving forward quickly.
Yeah, agreed.
Thank you.
All right, Councilor Porter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Through you to, I'll start with the CAO. In previous budget considerations, staff presented a list of maybe four nice to have positions, and we sort of had to pick and choose. Do you foresee that something like that coming back to council during budget deliberations again? I'll just say I absolutely support this. I'm just wondering if anything else is coming down the pipeline. This seems like it's probably a very high priority. And I'd like to thank the staff for taking the initiative to put this together and hire someone to take a look at this. You can't do information architecture and records management in various departments off the side of your desk. It really needs to be a coordinated effort when you have 600 or more employees in various locations and offices. So thank you very much. I'm just wondering what other positions are being considered, or if there are.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I'll apologize in advance if I freeze. My internet today has been really bad. You're all freezing for me regularly. So yes, staff are going through our listing of, we're talking about in our budget talks before the draft budget comes to you as to the various positions and prioritization throughout the city. So we are also looking at that, and council should be receiving, budget committee should be receiving information regarding the various needs of the city in other areas. This, however, has support from senior leadership as a very high priority for us.
Okay, thank you.
I would say, if I can take a second, Kristen, the recommendation on the screen is different from the published report. Was that intentional? Because that's not the published report recommendation that I have. Not that I don't want support for this, but we did amend it.
No, you are correct. The recommendation is just funding for the full-time permanent records and information analyst position be included in the draft 2020 operating budget for consideration. And then now there's the amendment to have it placed as a separate report on the general committee agenda for when we bring the minutes forward on October 5th, which is what is in the published agenda, and plus the amendment that was just brought forward.
Yeah, I would
you.
suggest we're going to bring a plan that encompasses more than 2021 when we come to the budget committee deliberations about this anyways. So, but we had only put the one in the recommendation.
All right, Councilor Porter still?
So we amended that because what was, I think, originally asked was for two positions, one now and potentially one in the future. All right, so you're kind of scaling it back to just consider the one position in 2021 for a records and information analyst, and the other one is an information architecture, which is part of a future plan. And those would be reporting to the IT manager. That would end up in the IT department.
The first one, the one for 2021 would be in the clerk's department to lead the project, and the other one would be IT. And as I said, I think we should be bringing you during the deliberations a plan over multiple years, because this is something that we're committing to for the long term. So we're not backing off these positions entirely, just phasing them.
Okay, because I just want to state, I think that second information architecture position, from what I understand, based on our IT needs and wants, is an absolute requirement. So thank you.
Okay, Councillor Littleton and then Mayor Sendzik.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I just have one question about the little chart at the end. What does a quick win mean? Is that something that can be done very recently or very not too far in the future? Is that what that means?
So through the chair, a quick win means something that would not need either significant resources or a lengthy process, that we could be implemented and have a benefit across the corporation. That assumes we actually have the staffing to work on it. As Councillor Porter mentioned, putting things like records management on the edge of your desk, it's never the one that calls you or emails you or has a meeting that has to be done by. So if we have the staff person, these are things that they would be able to start working on within that first year.
Okay, thank you. And I just wanted to say that I don't think I've ever gotten a report yet on council, and we're coming up to 2 years now into council. Coming up to it, seems like it's been 5 years at times thanks to COVID, but the language is very concerning. It sounds dire. When I'm hearing lack of this, there's a lack of common understanding. There poor record management, and then talking about almost 40% of the workforce is eligible to retire in 10 years. That's a significant number of people, and we could have quite the disruption to the corporation if we don't get this foundation put into place. So I do support this, and I don't think that we have an option. I think this is we must get this going, and we must be updating it. So I'll be supporting the motion. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Councillor Littleton. Mayor Sendzik.
Thank you, Council. Thank you, Chair Cisco. And just a couple of questions. One is to the CAO through the chair. You do have the ability to hire somebody within the current complement as approved by council. I believe council's directive in the last budget was that if it's within the current complement of numbers, that it's the senior team with the CAO can make decisions. Is that not correct?
Through Mr. Mayor, yes, we can hire within the complement, and as long as budget money, as long as there's enough budget for it. We have a significant amount of requirements across the corporation, and so we found that if we could hire a little bit in the year, we would be able to cobble together some money for 2020 within our existing budget. However, 2021 is a new budget, and we feel that this needs certainly the support of being a position that is within the budget process, within the approved budget.
So, and through the chair, as a follow-up, but I guess what I'm saying is that if this doesn't have to be a new position that adds on to the overall complement of staffing, is what you're asking in 2021, can the city manage to put it within the existing complement based on the number of people that may be retiring in different departments? And so I think if COVID has shown us anything, is that it's an opportunity to analyze each and every department and the positions that are in there. And if someone is retiring from X but could that position, not as the title, but in terms of what the salary provides, can migrate into IT. Is that something that you're exploring?
Through Mr. Mayor, or through Mr. Chair, we are exploring the IT component of this for 2021 being within our existing complement. It is within the clerk's department that the additional staffing member and resource is required. We're reviewing, and we can review, and when we present to budget committee, we can look and see at what the various staffing resources are required. But at this point, many of the vacancies that exist and are expected are already vacancies which the departments need to replace. But we are reviewing that. I believe we have a meeting scheduled for next week where SLT is looking through that, and certainly we bring that information forward to the budget deliberations.
Okay, and through the chair, I think that's an important part to note, that if it can be built into the existing complement of overall staffing structure, it's a new position, but it would be within a sort of budget envelope that is destined to be austere at best. And so the importance of it, I think, has been articulated by previous committee members, but also being mindful that in growing the complement becomes a challenge for council as well. So being able to balance those two, I think, is going to be important. And I think picking up what Councillor Littleton was talking about, like the report it is a gloom and doom report, and it could be read in two ways. One is there's been a complete lack of oversight by whatever group oversees this. And if that's the case, that's a bit of a concern, because it does seem to be in here that this has been for decades. They're using words like decades underfunded. And so from the CAO's perspective, is this something that's come to light recently, or has staff been putting this in front of council and council keeps rejecting it? Or why are we at where we are today, as I guess the question.
Through Mr. Mayor, well, certainly council has not seen it, nor has staff seen it in this comprehensive format. We were working away at this with admittedly not as much priority as we should have put to it. There's many priorities that are facing the city. And so we last budget cycle requested the money to have a consultant look at this and do what we hadn't found the resources to do ourselves. And it certainly is a serious situation.
And so I appreciate that, because I know that we've underfunded IT in previous budgets, not understanding the importance of it as it's growing when it comes to security. But again, the report does point to things like the corporation isn't meeting its legislated requirements. So if I was a member of the community, or if I was someone who's wanting to look at the city's resources, so we're actually failing on legislated requirements around records keeping, how long has that risk been an exposure for us? Through the chair.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I will defer to Director Salter to give more specifics in regarding to what is legislated and what is good record keeping practice.
Thank you. Through you, Mr. Chair, to the Budget Committee. So the Municipal Act's requirements with respect to record keeping are very high level. We're required to have record keeping systems. We're required to have a retention bylaw. So at a certain minimal level, we we comply with all of our legislative requirements. Excuse me. However, it's a question of how well do we comply and whether or not we're keeping up with the standard. And what the consultant certainly identified was that we are substandard. We haven't been, and the report, sort of the comments that were made earlier about running it off the side of your desk. That's how it's been approached. And, it's a difficult battle, frankly, every year in terms of competition for resources. The city, has very tight control on its complement, and justifiably so. It's a huge financial part of the budget. But the reality is that it's not something that is easily addressed. And to be frank, there were pieces of the puzzle that need to be put in place before we got to this point and being able to bring this recommendation forward. Before that we could do this, we needed the consultant. We had to go through the budget process. We got the money finally in 2018. By the time that the work was tendered and so forth and went out, it was in 2019. Prior to that, we needed to bring on a deputy clerk because the clerk's office didn't have a deputy clerk. So there was nobody in the office who would be able to take on this project. You had two managers, myself and the city clerk, and not possible to administer a project of this size. So, you know, this is sort of the challenge that we continually face with meeting all of these obligations, is finding the resources in the corporation that are available to do it. And, you know, unfortunately, being in a position of competing with all of our colleagues in all of the other departments who have, you know, very important concerns of their own with respect to staffing. So it's been a challenge. And, you know, I'm glad to see that the committee is concerned as it is, because I think justifiably so. This is a corporate responsibility and one that we are, you know, substandard in delivering. I have, you know, no reluctance in saying that. That's what the consultant found. But it takes resources in order to address those sorts of problems, and that's why we're in front of you now. And the consultant has given us a very, very detailed 5-year plan, you know, and how we bring ourselves back into, you know, an organization that is performing well in this function. And, you know, we look forward to being able to do that. But we do need someone within the clerk's office who will be that center of expertise to do that. And now that we have the deputy clerk as well, you know, there'll be someone who will be responsible for managing it.
No, I appreciate that, because I just get concerned when I see things that we're not meeting our legislative requirements, and that, I guess, in the context of this is saying we're barely meeting our legislative requirements, which is still concerning. But it, you know, it's if I was someone just looking at this that's not a counselor or staff, it would indicate that we're actually not performing the duties as required under municipal law, which would be a concern. So through the chair to the solicitor, we are meeting our requirements, but barely, is what you're saying.
Through you, Mr. Chair, that's correct. I mean, we certainly are compliant with the Municipal Act. We're compliant with meeting the timelines under the Municipal Freedom of Information Protection of Privacy Act. But the processes are not as efficient as they need to be, and they don't sort of aren't keeping up with best practices and not responding to our need to address the electronic information and data that the city now predominantly uses to collect all of its, you know, all of it and manage all of its information. So they're out of date. But, you know, as cumbersome as it is, you know, we do our very best to make sure that we are compliant.
So one final question, I guess this is to the CAO. A couple of years ago, we were talking about records storage, and I remember I made a request to look at offsite storage, because the region had gone to offsite storage where they weren't storing the records on their own properties. And I'm wondering through the CAO if you could recall that if I believe we had a report. Because if we did have a report, I'd want that to be included in the record storage, because I don't know if that was a staff decision not to do the offsite storage or if it was council's decision, but I'd like to hear from the CAO on that process, because this should have started a number of years ago when it was decided then that we shouldn't be storing our paper copies in less than secure places.
Through you, Mr. Mayor. That was not, I don't believe we had a council report, but that was the start of where you see ourselves today, in that when we had that meeting with the offsite storage places and to say, okay, what will we put and how do we, there's a bigger picture here. There's a bigger concern as far as not only storing the paper records, but the generation of the records, electronic records, and the whole process. So effectively looking at that brought us to deputy clerk, brought us to consultant, brought us to here today. So It did,
Okay,
there
so,
is no council report to attach.
and so through the chair, and I appreciate that. And I think that does speak to the paper storage. I'm going to say about 3 or 4 years ago, there was a meeting in terms of with one of the records companies, and they could have digitized it, and so staff would have been able to access digitally instead of going to an actual establishment or a place outside of the city hall. And so this has been on the radar for a bit, and it did lead to this one. There will be a cost in going out to RFP and that nature, but I think what I'm trying to say to the chair, to the CAO, is that the region's already done it, and we've got to get into the habit of trying to see if we can. I don't want to use the word, but sort of piggyback on other municipalities that are. If we could do a partnership or do an RFQ or RFP, whatever we could, that brings in Thorold and Pelham and Niagara Lake, and say, to a storage company, we've got 3 municipalities or 4 municipalities that wants to store our records offsite. We've got to start thinking like that. And again, if I go back to COVID has taught us that if we don't start thinking like that, so this is just one circle around records management. I guess through the chair, if I can ask as direction from the committee, is that those discussions should happen immediately, where the CAO can, in her regular meetings with other CAOs, go, who's doing record storage offsite? Put up your hand. Oh, 2 of you are? Okay, do the rest of you want to get in on a RFP that we can go out for a better price point so that we can actually save the taxpayer some dollars, but get into a facility that protects our records? Is that not something, or is through the chairs, if it's the will of the committee, through the CAO, is that something that you think that the area CAOs can get together on?
Through Mr. Mayor, certainly the area CAOs do talk about, as you know, a variety of these types of subjects. I'm comfortable speaking about it there. It would be within the context of this project as we lead it, but certainly we can have those discussions.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I'm not seeing any other hands for discussion on this. So if there are no other questions or comments, I will look to clerk to call the roll on the recommendation on the screen.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Mayor Sendzik.
Just before I say yes, can I just inject one more thing? In the 2019 operating budget, there was $20,000 for offsite storage records. I just want to flag that for the CAO, just as a further discussion that we can have offline. Other than that, I vote in favor.
Chair Cisco,
Yes.
and that's carried.
All right, moving on to item 10.3, Financial Management Services, the year-to-date report for the 2020 second quarter operating variance and forecast. I'm going to look to the Director of Financial Management Services and City Treasurer, Ms. Douglas, to give a brief overview of the report. Ms. Douglas.
Thank you, through you, Mr. Chair. This report includes the results of the first 2 quarters of 2020. At June 30th, the city's total expenditure budget was 44%, with 50% of the year complete, and not all expenditures are incurred evenly throughout the year. All the city departments are involved with the development of this year-to-date report, and they are requested to provide any comments with regards to variances that are greater than or less than 10% of the percentage of the year complete. Therefore, for the second quarter report, finance requested explanation for items that were less than 40% or more than 60% of their annual budget, and details are provided in the appendix to the report for the committee. On the revenue side, we have billed 100% of the 2020 tax levy, with normal collection dates over the last business day of June and September being deferred to the last business day of July and October due to COVID-19. Non-tax revenue and contributions from other governments are currently at 42%, and most contributions from other governments are received typically in the third quarter due to the invoicing of our payment in lieu of taxation accounts. Tax appeals and write-offs are at 42% of the annual budget. Under the provincial emergency orders, the processing of ARB and minutes of settlement decisions were paused. This restriction was lifted on September the 11th. City staff are moving forward with the processing of tax adjustments and write-offs in Q3 and Q4. At this time, it is estimated that these amounts will be consistent with the 2020 budgeted amount. Investment income and revenues have been impacted by COVID-19, with the Bank of Canada lowering interest rates. Therefore, a decline of this revenue stream of approximately $150,000 is expected for 2020. Penalties and interest income of taxes are projected to be significantly under budget by approximately $885,000 due to the COVID-19 pandemic and the city offering a grace period to interest and penalties for outstanding property tax amounts for March and June, through March to June 2020. Council has also approved a property tax interest and penalty relief program for residential properties at its June 13th meeting and for non-residential properties on September 14th. These programs are application-based and allow the property owner to defer their final 2020 tax installments until November 30th without incurring penalty or interest charges. The POA revenues are expected to be unfavorable by $132,000 due to the closure of the courts, decreased travel, and reduction of traffic fines due to COVID-19. Overall, non-tax revenue accounts are estimated to be unfavorable for 2020 by approximately $1.18 million. As you all know, the city has been significantly impacted by COVID-19. At the end of Q2, the city had incurred approximately $293,000 to battle COVID pandemic, which was not included in the 2020 budget. By mid-September, this amount has risen to $502,000. The annual cost for COVID-19 specific items is estimated to be approximately $800,000. As you've heard during the regular COVID-19 updates to Council, COVID-19 has a significant impact on the tax levy budget for the city. SLT and staff have continued to focus their efforts to mitigate and contain costs through workforce reduction and hiring deferrals, which are forecasted to be $2.76 million for 2020. Other expenditure reductions related to utility costs due to facility closures are estimated to be $672,000, with other miscellaneous cost containments totaling $94,000 due to staff not attending conferences, office supply, and postage reduction. The total cost containment and mitigation items equal $3.5 million, which has been included in the most recent estimated tax levy impact to the end of 2020 of $4.3 million. In mid-August, the city received notification that it would be receiving funding under the Safe Restart program of $3.6 million. This funding announcement will assist significantly in reducing the forecasted 2020 year-end deficit to approximately $800,000. However, it will not eliminate the unfavorable year-end position. The Safe Restart program has a phase 2, which is application-based, and the city will be submitting an application for this phase for additional upper levels of government financial assistance for the remaining 2020 year-end deficit that's forecasted. The pandemic has also hit the city's parking budget extremely hard. At this time, staff are estimating an unfavorable year-end position for the parking services of $562,000. The uncommitted funds in the parking reserve at the end of 2019 was $741,000, which is sufficient to cover the 2020 forecasted year-end deficit. Anticipating the parking services will continue to run a deficit, the 2021 parking services budget will need to be supported by the tax levy due to parking reserve being depleted unless another source of funding is identified. The 2020 expenditure details are in the Appendix 1 and explanations are contained there for your review. Staff representatives are also here from each department should there be any questions that the committee may have with regards to their Q2 variance. Mr. Chair, that completes my report with regards to the position of the city as of the end of Q2.
Thank you, Ms. Douglas. Can I have a motion, please, to put this on the floor? And I can't see anyone, so someone's going to have to unmic to say that they're moving the motion.
I'll put it on the floor, Mr. Chair. Councillor Phillips.
Thank you, Councillor Phillips, and a seconder.
Councillor Littleton.
Thank you, Councillor Littleton. Are there any questions or comments? This is a receiving motion, obviously. Any questions or comments? All right, seeing none, then I will look to the clerk to call the roll.
Counselor Phillips,
Yes,
Counselor Littleton,
Yes,
Counselor
Sorry.
Dodge,
Yes.
Mayor
have-
Sensi,
Sorry,
Councilor Porter?
sorry about that. I tried to put my hand up and you didn't see it. Are you okay to take some questions and then we can call the roll
Okay.
after?
We can, yes, we will go back and we will call the roll again. Councilor Porter, go ahead.
I just have a couple of questions. I don't see the Director of Municipal Works here. I'm curious about if there was a serious impact to the tree budget or tree maintenance. I'm only asking because we've received several phone calls about delays, and I'm just wondering if some of the staff layoffs had a significant impact on tree maintenance.
All right, so if the director's not here,
The
anybody else?
CAO for that question if Daryl's not here.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can have Daryl provide some additional information, but certainly as part of the mitigative measures, we had less staff this year. So some of the work that normally would have happened has been delayed. So certainly we are with more of a backlog at this point than we would have been at this point last year. But I can have the director send some more information to you in an email.
Thank you. Through the chair to the Director of Financial Management, maybe there's a silly reason for this. When I look at the variance in the outside boards and commissions, they're all showing as 0, even though some of them will end up in a favorable position, like the library board. Is that supposed to be, are there supposed to be zeros there in that spreadsheet?
Yep. Through you, Mr. Chair, with regards to reporting for the agency boards and commissions, at this point in time, as we are at the mid-year, and although they are forecasting a favorable variance, the majority of the agency boards and commissions also have reserve policies with regards to how those surpluses are to be allocated. So therefore, at this point in time, although they are forecasting a favorable variance, there is procedures how that variance would be handled, and therefore we have shown it as a break-even position for a number of those entities. With regards to the Transit Commission, they too, like the city, will be receiving some provincial funding, and it has been indicated in that funding announcement that any funds not required to mitigate their deficit in 2020 may be carried forward in a reserve to assist with 2021. So therefore, again, made the decision that it is best to show it as a break-even 0 position for the end of the year at this point in time.
Okay, so we can expect that the outside boards and commissions will be coming to council to report on what they're going to do with any favorable like year-end variances if they've got like some revenue. That will be part of the council discussion. We'll be able to make sure that they're doing the right thing in terms of how they're putting them into reserves.
Through you, Mr. Chair, with regard to the agency boards and commissions, that will come forward in a couple of ways. One, it'll come forward as part of their 2021 budget presentations that will be presented to the committee, and it will also come through the additional quarter variances that will be coming forward in for Q3 and Q4 of the similar to this Q2 one. Okay.
And I have another question. So we're going to dip into the parking reserve at about $700,000. And I'm not sure if I can't remember if we had some other purpose for that reserve or what we were holding on to it for. But I suspect when we get into reserves, it's going to have an impact on future projects. I'm hoping, will that be part of the discussion? We'll know kind of what we might be giving up in order to pay off the deficit situation we're in right now. Are we going to get some clarity around that when we start dipping into some of these reserves?
Through you, Mr. Chair, with regard to the parking services budget and reserve, that reserve is set up for the specific purposes of the parking services functions. It is a rate reserve similar to our water and wastewater, and the purpose of that reserve is to use it to fund the parking services of the city. What we are seeing happening in the current situation with regard to the parking services budget, the annual budget isn't a break even or a positive budget. It does rely on the reserve to fund it. And if we need to use the reserve balance to cover off the deficit that's incurred in 2020, what will happen is the parking services then will need support from the tax levy budget. And that's what we're anticipating occurring in the 2020 budget. So that will be creating an additional pressure for the committee to consider as part of the 2021 operating budget discussions.
Okay, thank you. I think that's the end of my questions. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor. And I just wanted to mention as well, I think it's important to recognize, and Ms. Douglas can correct me if I'm wrong, but when it comes to the outside boards and commissions and their reserve policies, all of those policies were brought to council 2 budget years ago. Am I correct in that, Ms. Douglas?
Through you, Mr. Chair, yes, it was in the first part of 2019, if my memory serves me correctly, that the library and the transit brought forward those reserve policies.
So yeah, so I wanted to bring that up, that we have had a look at those policies in the past. I think it's good that when they come forward, they speak to those policies and how they relate to this year, because obviously this year is anything but normal. But no, I appreciate the question. Appreciate the question from Councillor Porter in any event. With that, and I'm just taking another quick look, I'm not seeing anybody else. So if we can call the roll again this time, and let's start from the top. Deputy Clerk, please.
Councillor Phillips,
Yes.
Councillor Littleton,
Yes.
Councillor Dodge,
Yes.
Mayor Sendzik,
Yes.
Councillor Porter,
Yes.
and Chair Cisco.
Yes.
And that's carried.
All right, moving on to item number 11, report requests. There have been no notices of report requests submitted to the office of the city clerk, and I'm not seeing anybody raising their hand. However, are there any report requests for this afternoon or requests for information? And Councillor Porter, am I looking to you for requests for information?
Yes, I don't need a full-on report. I would like some information on the tree management this year, how it's been impacted by COVID. And I'm also wondering if the Municipal Works Department keeps some metrics around tree maintenance and the turnaround time to get trees looked at and taken down, that we would be able to see. It's become a concern based on some of the recent emails I'm receiving. So if there could be some kind of memo about that, I would appreciate that.
All right, I'm going to look to, in the absence of the director, I'm going to look to the CAO. So can we ask for a memo on that topic before the next meeting?
Through you, Mr. Chair, certainly.
Excellent, thank you. Any other requests for information or report requests before we move on? All right, seeing none, then we have a motion from Councillor Littleton for adjournment. Is that correct, Councillor Littleton? The smile on your face says yes. All those in favor of adjournment? Opposed? Seeing none, For Councillor Littleton, go Saints, and for everybody else, enjoy your Monday night. Something tells me this may be the last one of these that is as short as this one was. Meeting adjourned. Good night,
Thanks.
everyone.
Bye, everyone.